Hello everyone and welcome to the second video and the second day of my ride on the Route des Grandes Alpes. After a rainy day yesterday, I wanted to benefit as much as possible from a dry spell that was announced on the weather report. So I left early. I started riding at 8:30 and made my way over two mountain passes. The first, well known to watchers of the Tour de France, the Col de la Colombière, that was also on this year's route, as you could see from the bottle and the bikes in the traffic circle. The second one, the Col des Arabes. The Col de la Colombière is very difficult. It tops out at 1,573 meters, and especially the last part features slopes of 10, 11, sometimes 12%. The beginning, even though I'm breathing hard, is relatively shallow slopes, but as you can see, at least at this point, the weather was very favorable and I enjoyed riding up this mountain. In the last video I promised you more information about the Route des Grandes Alpes, and I will at least give you the short run around. So the route, as you've seen, leaves from Thonon-les-Bains at Lake Geneva and goes all the way to Nice. On that way it passes some 17 mountain passes, and it takes about 700 kilometers depending on whether you do any variants. In the format that I'm following, it's supposed to be split into about 14 stages, but that can, as you will see in the next video probably, can vary depending on how well your legs are feeling and the weather especially. On the day stage, I'm leaving the Massif du Chablais that stretches from Delémont, the Lake Geneva, into the chain of the Arabes Mountains, which is also what the next mountain pass is named after. The Col de la Colombière separates the two massifs. In the back you can still see the little village of Reposoir, where I took a break on the way up the mountain. There's a very, very pretty chartreuse a special type of monastery where the monks are sequestered into their own little rooms. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to recognize in the distance. Up there in the middle of this steepest part of this climb, you can now see where the mountain pass will top out. Unfortunately, at this point my camera moved, so the remaining images were not salvageable unless you were interested in just looking at the road, which at least you could see the different paintings that people left from the last stage of the Tour de France, and even though they were not meant for me, it still worked. That made me feel like I was on a bike race up this mountain. What of course also helped was that in one curve there was suddenly a class of school children shouting, cheering me on to go up the mountain as quickly as possible. So cycling here is well known and even encouraged, which is always nice to see.
Bonjour. Bonjour.
I'm honestly surprised how well the wind suppression on this camera works. It's quite amazing that you can only hear my voice and none of the wind, which is insanely loud, of course, going down here at speeds of 50-60 kilometers an hour. After the descent, I had a quick lunch at Cluses and started the ascent to the Cluses, which tops out at 1486 meters, and which, at least on the ascent, the weather was still quite nice, although you could already see the rain clouds on the other side of the col as I was approaching it. In my book, the col is described as a beautiful prairie landscape, and you can definitely see that. Also the very impressive flank of the mountain ahead of me made for quite some scenery. Unfortunately, the promised views of Mont Blanc have still not appeared. The clouds are enveloping it quite nicely. And spoiler alert, even on the next day, which is when I'm recording this video, I did not have a chance to see Mont Blanc yet. Despite some really terrible roads, the descent from the Cluses was incredibly pretty, especially the latter part after the first serpentines led to a very nice gorge with waterfalls coming down on both sides, and at some points it looked like the street was just glued to the side of the mountain about 300-400 meters above the river. If you look to the left, you can see this little marker, which on the Col de la Colombière still looked like there were signs standing up on marking the ascent to these cols. The fact that now there's little rocks on the side of the road also marks the fact that on the Col de Arly I changed departments from Haute-Savoie to Savoy itself, which will be the department all the way to the Col de Liseron. Finally, I made it to the campsite, a little bit above the Route des Grandes Alpes, at a very cute little campground where the owner offers cyclists like me a little tent to sit in, where I prepared my dinner and had a good night's sleep.